Okay, I'm Jim Slappey, locally known when I was growing up around here as Jim Henry. And my mother was Jean Yeoman Slappey, who my dad met at a street dance, and she was from a farm between Bainbridge and Attapulgos. And of course my dad, he grew up where the bank is, and my grandfather and grandmother Slappey lived there. My grandfather came from up around Boston, Georgia, and he had 4 sisters, but I think he was about 10 or 11 years old when they moved down here, because he used to delight in telling me stories about the girls and his mother rode the ferry at Fairbanks Ferry, off State 12 now. And they rode the ferry across the river, and he and his dad swam the mules and horses across. Great Depression came along and wiped the bank out. Well, a number of the citizens and stockholders of the bank came to my grandfather and asked him to take over the bank and rejuvenate it and get it back up to speed and a functioning banking institution. And I think in trading around, he accepted the job as long as he had control and interest in it. So he took the bank over and brought it back to functioning and did very well. And then my dad, of course, followed in his footsteps and went in the bank, and the 2 of them for years ran the bank. And a little side note on women and their involvement in the community. My mother was a sharp gal. She went to Georgia State College for Women, and she was working in the clerk's office in Bainbridge in Decatur County when Dad married her. Well, Second World War came along, and I think my grandfather was probably in the legislature maybe about that time. Well, Dad went off to the Army Air Corps, and Mother wound up running the bank, and they also had a little insurance agents in there. So Mother ran the bank and ran the insurance agency and ran it very well. And I was born in 1938, so I was at the age where I could really be a problem to her. And my sister, Betty, was a year and a half younger than I was. And Mother had an old blanket that she would put in the corner of the bookkeeping room. And there was no such thing as daycare then. So Betty and I would take our coloring books and toys, and she had some help too, and go to the bank, and the 2 of us would sit back there in the bookkeeping room and try to stay out of trouble best we could. My dad was in the service about 3 years.
That's great. Yeah.
And after the war was over and he came home, and I remember that the railroad, was the primary method of transportation inside the United States, and most of the troop trains would come in and out of River Junction over around in the Chattahoochee area. And we went over to pick up Dad, and he had his sea bag and all, or, well, I forget what the Air Force calls it. We sailors call it a sea bag, but with all his gear in it. And we picked him up there and brought him home. And my mother, she used to tell me in later years, she said, when your dad got home, he got settled in good, and I cooked his breakfast one morning, and I laid the keys to the bank there next to his plate, and I said, Henry, I'm going back to be a mother and a housewife. Ask me if you got any questions. So she stepped out of the banking business, but and you know, that was typical of the war years. So many wives and mothers stepped in and picked up the slack and picked it up very, very well. It was just a great place to grow up. I mean, life was pretty simple. And we had free roam of the whole area. You know, we'd get on our bicycles and ride bikes to school. And they had a canning company on 9th Street, right at the bottom of the hill, just off of Main. The old building's still there, but they canned beans and blueberries and all kind of stuff for the military. And that was our main route. We would go and see how fast we could get up going down Cannon Plant Hill and up by the Methodist Church and over to the school. But you could take a quarter and go to the Havana Theater over where the vacant lot is. It used to be Alexander's Auto Parts. And on Saturday, you catch a double feature cowboy movie with a couple of cartoons, and then they had the serials, which were kind of like the soap operas of today, you know, except you got them on Saturday at the theater. And have enough money left, I think it was a dime maybe to get in. You remember, Donna? Yeah. And you could get a bag of popcorn, a candy bar, and a soda pop, and have a penny left for bubble gum. So, and that was a big event on Saturdays. All the kids in town, we all flocked down there to the movie house, you know. And you know, just a little word about my grandfather. He loved this town. This was just the most special place in the world to him. And he served as mayor for a number of years. I don't even know how many, but I'm sure you're aware that the town had this championship softball team, the Havana Rappers. And that was a highlight of my grandfather's year, because they always asked the mayor to throw out the first pitch. And here come Gene Slappey walking out there, and he had his three-piece banking suit on and his shine shoes, and he'd get out there and he'd throw that first pitch. And he loved the Rappers. He like I say, that was a highlight of his year, to get to throw that first pitch out. I got some pictures somewhere of him throwing that first softball pitch, and he's got on this three-piece banking suit. And one of the things I remember about the bank, and my sister and I would go down and fold statements and put them in the envelopes and stamp them and take them to the post office. So I saw this account called the National War Fund, care of J.E. Robinson, and he was a timberman that lived further down the block, over right across from where Babcock is, along in that couple of houses toward the end there. But, so I asked my dad one day, I said, Dad, there's not any activity to speak of in this, and it's got a little money in it, so what is it? And he laughed and he said, well, son, that was created by the merchants in Havana during the Second World War. And a fella came through town that was destitute and down on his luck. They would draw on the National War Fund. If he needed new clothes, they could send him to Morgan Brothers and get him a good set of clothes, and they let him go spend the night down in the jail. He'd get him all cleaned up and a good hot meal at Johnny Cook's boarding house and a bus ticket. So there was a lot of that type of charity work going on, you know, in those days, and they didn't have big administrations behind them, so the money went to the right place. We liked to work. I was always bored right quick if I didn't have something to do, and work was a good way to keep us boys out of trouble, so. And then we got into the project business. First year I was in, I raised pecans because we had pecan trees in the backyard, and that was the easy way to get started. And then I got in the cattle business and showed steers for, 5 years, I guess. And that's something that's carried on with me on into later life, is the skills I learned, the carpenter skills and a little bit of welding and whatnot in that ag shop down there are things I've enjoyed all my life. And over the years I've done some residential and commercial building and stuff, and still always tinkering, making some little deal. And then I learned how to manage money with the cattle operation. And my dad wouldn't loan me the money to buy a calf with. He said, you're too close family, you go talk to your granddad. So I went in there and talked to my grandfather and told him what I needed to do, and he said, well, you gotta submit a business plan. So I gotta know how much money you're gonna need, how much a calf's gonna cost, how much you're gonna spend on feed, and one thing or the other. So I got busy and I threw something together. And the biggest lesson I learned was when I was playing ball and I was running around riding my bike and having fun and fishing with my buddies, and I was laying up there asleep at night, the interest clock kept running. Because when I went to pay my loan off on my first calf, my granddad sat back there and totaled it all up, and I looked at that and I said, well, Granddad, I don't have enough to hardly go to the movie on. I said, what is all this? He said, that's what I told you, son, about the interest clock. but he said, you can still make money off this calf. Said, you know all that stable manure you got in that stall out there? Said, get Uncle Ned, and he was a guy that did chores around, plowed my granddad's garden and did stuff like that. He said, get Uncle Ned in his pickup, and springtime comes, you load all that stuff up and take it around and sell it to the ladies in town to put on their azaleas. We had a painter named Norfleet. And Norfleet was widely known for his painting, and I recall Lad Maxwell had the Standard Station right across catty corner from my house, and Norfleet would hang out around there. He was an incredible artist. I can remember just watching him just spellbound. He'd say, somebody come up there at Northfleet and say, you see that sign down the street? See that Ford sign? Yeah. He said, let me show you what that thing looks like. He'd pull a piece of chalk out of his pocket and freehand. He'd just, like I was signing my name. I said, you want to measure? He said, that's a 1/5 scale of that sign. The guy was incredible, and you'd always see Northfleet on a ladder with a paintbrush in one hand and a paint in his hip pocket. A lot of our success is directly related to the environment we grew up in. We were encouraged to think for ourselves. And we knew the adults like Mr. Yurdy and Pete Spear that we could go to if we had a question about something. We knew we'd get good guidance. And the work ethic, we all worked. You know, we were mowing grass, we're doing anything we could to make a quarter here and there, and we'd go work in the back of fields. And I started out as a lugger, and we had a barn boss named Sid Jones. Bobby remembers him. He was a tough old guy. And he had a station out here at Old Salem. And I was in the field one day, and Mr. Sid sent for me. I said, oh boy, I'm in trouble. He didn't call you unless he had something to rip you about. So I go running up to the barn, and he said, Slappey, you're Henry's boy and Jean's grandson, aren't you? I said, yeah. He said, that probably means you can count. He said, I need a stick boy. So you don't go back to the field anymore. You come on over here and I'll teach you how to count sticks. And that was my job the rest of the time. I think I worked a couple of summers for him. And I'd go to the barn where it was cooler and count sticks and wrap them in bundles. Yeah.